So I'd like to get started and introduce the third VSP talk. This one is by Martina Raue from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, HLab. It's titled Trust in Self-Driving Cars, the Need for Reaching Women and the 50-Plus Generation.
Thank you very much, and also thank you for inviting me to present. Yeah, is that okay? Do I have to go really close? I'm from the HLab, and together with my colleagues that are listed here, we did a study, a pretty large survey on trust, and we at the HLab do lots of different things, and we're a very interdisciplinary team. And we looked at a lot of variables around self-driving cars and the acceptance of self-driving cars. And trust was part of the study, and I'm going to present some of our results today. But I want to start out with some background on trust, and probably many of you remember Knight Rider from the 1980s, and Knight Rider was a TV series, and there was a car named Kit, and Kit had a personality and was its partner, Michael Knight's partner, and programmed to save human lives. And when you think about, would you trust Kit? Maybe you would. Would you trust Kit as much to let your child ride in it? And when you think about it, does it matter that Kit has a name and that Kit has a voice and that you maybe know Kit because you've seen it many times on TV? And those are questions we looked into also. Because trust is it's a construct, and trust always involves some making oneself vulnerable to someone else. And trust is usually something we look at between people, and it becomes tricky when we look at trust between a person and a machine. So we make ourselves vulnerable to a machine, but trust also is based on positive expectations of the intentions of the other, and also on shared values. And so we see why it is difficult to work with trust and machines or robots. Oh, sorry. So there have been some studies on that, and we talked about this earlier, what it means that machines become more human-like or have human-like features. And in these studies, it was shown that people trusted a self-driving car more and blamed it less for accidents if it had a voice and a name. And in this case, it was named Iris, and people trusted it more than another self-driving car that didn't have a name or a voice, and also a regular car. And it was because of this personification, and it was shown in other studies also that human-like features do perceive this intentionality of the machine. And yeah, it's maybe not that something looks like a human, but that something acts like a human, and I can kind of expect what's going to happen. And because this intentionality creates some kind of transparency, and then this results in trust also. And other studies have shown that shared driving goals, and I talk about shared values as a part of trust, and also transparency regarding what the machine is going to do and why it's going to do it, increase trust in self-driving cars, or in this case, advanced driving technology. So I think these are important issues here. And in general, trust is really important in our society, and it's really, society wouldn't work without trust. So especially if we don't have knowledge or information, we need to rely on trust. It is some kind of a heuristic that helps us to make decisions and acts in situations where we don't have enough knowledge. So for example, we trust our doctor to make a medical decision for us, and then we need to trust a car, even though we don't know how it works, to make good decisions for us. But trust is very fragile and can be easily destroyed, and that's a big problem, especially with self-driving cars, because there has been a lot of negative headlines, and trust is so hard to build. But because of headlines on crashes that people have seen in the last year, trust has been trust has decreased, and to build it up again is really challenging, I think. And those headlines on the Tesla crash, the news, they questioned the regulations over the technology, and there were also some very personal stories about people involved in those accidents. And this is something that really gets to people, that really sticks in their head, and this is an issue because also those pictures, no one was killed here luckily, but this makes us, when we think about risks and trust around self-driving cars, this is something that comes up with for many people who don't have other knowledge on the technology. So if you ask lay people about self-driving cars, that's all they might know about them. And even though there's also positive news out there, they don't get recognized that much because negative events are just more visible and carry much more weight than positive information. And that is an issue because we all know that self-driving cars have the potential to make driving a lot safer, and we know there are these statistics out there that show us how dangerous regular cars can be and how many people are killed in those accidents every day also, but we don't see the pictures and we don't read the headlines and the personal stories about that every day. And this shows us how risk perception is really something very subjective, and that the public's perception of those risks is very different from what you as experts maybe also see as risks, and what the public thinks is important also for policy and regulations around those technologies, because in the end they need to make sure that the public feels comfortable adopting them. And so, with the driving, for example, we know that most people think they're better than average regarding their driving skills, and that's not possible, that everyone is better than average, right? But people think that when they have control, then they feel safer, and those kind of things makes them shape their risk perceptions. So we think it is really important to find out what the public thinks and what the public perceptions are, because they differ very much from what we know as experts or what statistics tell us. And so we did a large survey, as I said, and we asked over almost 2,000 people across the United States and different age groups what they think about self-driving cars. And in the following slides, I will show the questions on trust. So we had several questions here. We asked about general trust, not regarding self-driving cars, but in general, how much do you trust different organizations? And then in general, how much do you trust technology? And we had, for all these questions, we had several items and we merged them together. And then we had questions on specific trust of organizations to produce a self-driving car, and also in a self-driving car to work reliably. And we see here this is the oldest generation, the silent generation. Here we have the youngest generation, so it's kind of counterintuitive maybe. We see that general trust in organization, that can be anything, that can be technology, that can be churches, police, military, that's all kind of different organizations, and here we don't see, with the light blue, not so much difference between the age groups. But when it comes to technology and self-driving cars, we really see a big difference between the older age groups and the younger age groups. And trust is much lower among those who are over 50. And we also see, and I don't have a slide on this, but we see that women trust much less than men trust. So this is interesting because when you think about it, self-driving cars, that really could be really beneficial to older adults, right? So it is challenging for them to give up their car keys, and self-driving cars could have large benefits when people age. And also the baby boomers are those who can afford those kind of technologies that are more expensive, but at the same time, this group seems to be less likely to adopt the technology. And we looked into these issues and asked, so would you use a self-driving car when you're physically incapable of driving? So that's the first one here. Mentally capable of driving, and all kinds of different other conditions, and still the older people here on the left, always the darker blue, are always less likely to say, yes, I would use a self-driving car in these situations. And especially in like more challenging situations, they would generally not use a self-driving car. On the other hand, we see that older people have more confidence in their own driving abilities, and this kind of explains, of course, they have much more experience driving, but it also explains why they might be very reluctant to new technology, because they would have to relearn something, and they would have to give up a skill they can manage really well, and they may not want that. So this is interesting to see, and explains why we find what we find. And another question we asked was, would you let a child ride in a self-driving car alone? And we asked this for different age groups of children. And we see the same picture here. So yeah, it's all very similar results regarding the trust, and it's always the women and the 50 plus who have very low levels of trust. And then we looked at, well, what predicts those trust measures that we find, and we calculated regressions here, and we see that besides age, it is really risk and benefit perception, and especially benefit perception, what makes people trust. So the more benefit they perceive, the more likely they would say they trust a self-driving car. And in the literature, risk and benefit perception are usually negatively correlated. So the more benefit someone perceives, the less risk the person perceives. And we see here also that gender is very important regarding the child question. 2/3 of those who said they would let a child ride in a self-driving car alone were men, and the women would not do that so much. So yeah, we think this is interesting to look at, and wondered what could be done to reach those with little trust. And like I said, I think it's important to really point out the benefits for those specific target groups that couldn't be reached so far, but especially older ones could highly benefit from the technology. And then we think that's important to create a framework of regulations, and I think there's already a lot of discussion out there, but this is something that really reduces uncertainty among people if there are clear standards around, so what does it mean if a car works reliable, and what does it not mean? Where is human attention needed because the technology is not ready yet, because safety cannot be proven yet, because there's just not enough data, and we see that accidents happen. And so I think for the public to feel safer, it is important to have clear regulations on what a self-driving car can do and cannot do, or should be able, or where a human needs to interfere, and also question about operator age. Is it even possible to let a child ride into a self-driving car alone? I don't know if those questions are all addressed yet. And in the same line, it's important to really listen to the public, I think, because their perceptions might be very different from what the experts think, and it's for safety, to increase their perceived safety, that we need to give the public a voice and engage in this two-way communication. And this comes also with the transparency that we need, not only with the car that kind of is transparent in what it does, and in that way increases trust, but also the whole developmental process. And like I said, the communication needs to be transparent to help people build trust in the technology. And finally, I think especially for older people, it is very difficult to keep up with the innovation that's happening. So there's like so many innovative designs and technologies out there, but the public is not part of this process, and I think it's important to kind of introduce it maybe more gradually. And this was in the New Yorker this week, and I thought it's funny to think about it, that, yeah, and this comes back to the question whether it would be creepy that a robot looks like a human, and it would also be creepy if a self-driving car is self-conscious or self-actualized.
I call your attention to who drew the cartoons.
Yeah.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and I think, so I think this is not what creates trust, but it's more the transparency and being able to predict what the machine does is what helps people to trust it. Yeah, and these are Miss Daisy and Miss Rosie from the H Lab. Thank you very much.
I toss. You call on people and I toss. This is blinding.
Oh, do you want
All right, let's
to
try
get it
this.
up there?
Ah, sorry. Yep. Good. Nice catch.
Thank you. So there seem to be two reasons why the older people trust cars less, or two potential reasons. One is they think they're such good drivers that they don't need to drive in self-driving cars, and the other is that they don't like technology, because technology seems to, like, distrust of technology tracks pretty linearly with distrust in self-driving cars. Have you looked at mediational analyses to see which of those could be accounting for the age group effect?
We have not done mediation analysis, and I think it's probably also not that easy to really predict it from a few variables, what makes older adults trust less.
Well, yeah, but it could be important for if you want to actually design
Yeah.
interventions.
Definitely, we have a lot of data from this survey still, and
Yeah.
there's a lot to look at. So,
Cool.
thanks for that. Yeah, we'll definitely do that.
Who am I throwing this to?
To the next person.
Okay, any other questions?
Well, I do have a question. Self-sacrifice. So, to go back to the questions of law, design, policy, do you think that your findings warrant a strong push towards, for example, emphasizing advertisement, guiding sales efforts, information efforts, in order to make people's responses more similar? Or is this just the reality that we have to live with, and there is no policy or other measures that we can or should take? So what is the normative implication, if you will,
Well,
of
I
your
think
findings?
it's both, probably. I think that the older generation generally less likely to adopt, in general, new technology, and more likely to want to stick to their car. And I think that might also be a possibility to start from, and trying to point out the benefits of the technology, and really the usefulness for this group especially, that might be important to look into. So they would maybe see that it might be worth to give up the skill that they're really good at and they like to do, maybe for this new skill that they could learn.
People over 50 is such a gigantic demographic that I find it hard to take seriously a study that kind of lumps them all together. I'm 63, and I'm not experiencing any unprecedented fear of new technology. You know, and the other thing is that I guess I'm wondering if there is an assumption that they're somehow wrong to resist new technology. Maybe they resist new technology because they're very experienced with new technologies and know that they go wrong some of the time. But the really older people that I know, many of them are really frightened of having their ability to drive removed, because it removes their autonomy. And I would have thought that in that situation, rationality would prevail, and they would think, well, better to be able to go out in a self-driving car than not at all.
Yeah, and you're totally right in your points, and I totally agree that so we just made this cut there because we kind of saw the difference, and I'm sure that like there's more to be looked into. But I think especially those, like I said earlier, those who cannot drive anymore because of physical declines, and it's a question of whether they would switch to a self-driving car or not.
Or public transport.
Yeah, but then if you live out in the country, it's really difficult. We have this group coming into the lab. They're our lifestyle leaders. They're all 85 and older. They come every 2 months, and we talk about all these issues with them. And they complain about public transport and the ride in Boston, which is especially for older people, but they complain about it and say, it doesn't work for me. It's just complicated, and it's not the right thing. So I think the potential here is very large, and this needs to be looked into more. Yes, thank you.
This is just a random idea. Oops. Random idea that popped into my head as you were talking. But is there any vision of potentially, so I don't know how exactly the cars were presented to them. I'm assuming it was just kind of like general robots. They're general cars, right? General autonomous cars.
So they were defined like a full autonomous car, yes.
Right, but have you considered possibly as a kind of design, maybe basically thinking about not just the car, but like the interaction within the car? So maybe driving in the car, if there are other people in there, might be so maybe driving in the car by yourself might be a more intimidating prospect. But if you could go in there and actually driving in the car could be a chance to chat with some other people, or I don't know, maybe that would work in the Midwest, but not in some other places. But you know, just thinking about some of the situations that they might be in the car, or how being in the car would be experienced, that would, you know, change it or make it more palatable or interesting, or trustworthy for kind of more than just that particular population.
Yeah, I totally think that would be interesting to look into, because there's also some research showing that like really experiencing technology makes a huge difference. It's just so abstract still for many people, I think, that it's hard to imagine, and of course it's frightening because it's like, yeah, we haven't really set in one. So.
You don't want me to throw it at you?
You toss to me, I toss to you.
So I was just wondering whether you made any analogies with other industries in which the kind of currency of trust has changed, and particularly I'm thinking of maybe the financial industry, where we've gone from physical currencies to digital currencies, and you've had to think of trusting other people with credit in a very different way.
We haven't done that, but that's interesting. Yeah. Good point.
Oh, okay, I'll bring this one up.
I think he wants to go.
Thank you. I'd like to go back to the public transportation and versus the sort of like single rider experience, or at least few rider experience. Do you think that as time goes on and we start building trust into the autonomous vehicles, that the public transportation solution could become autonomous, and then it'll be sort of viable? Because you said that people complain that the public transportation system doesn't work for them, and that is largely true because it's a largely faulty system, right? People can't really, in some cases you can't count on it to be on time, and you can't sort of like plan your day because of it. And that's where sort of Uber and all of these other solutions come into play. It's a sort of like a personalized transportation system without having to own. But we could be looking at, I think, in the future where, like, we're already doing Uber Pool, for example. And if you just combine that with the autonomous vehicle then and scale it up, then you have autonomous public transportation, kind of. Is that something that you see your research going into the future, or the general sort of field?
So that's a hard question, because my research is not really on the car side. It's more on the people side. So I think, but it's already happening, right? The Uber, the self-driving car. Like, And in Copenhagen, there's a self-driving bus and stuff like that. So I think it's really an interesting development. Yeah, but from your point, what you're saying, the complaints about the system also that our participants in the lab, the older participants always bring up is, well, it's nice, it brings me somewhere, and then what? Then I'm there and I can't get out myself, and I can't, I need help. So I would also need a robot in the self-driving car, and I think that could be the next step here. Like, the car itself is not enough for older, like very old people who depend on it. They need more help than just a car that drives them around. So I think that would be interesting for future research also.